In Search of Veganism 1 by Leslie J. Cross, from the summer 1949 issue of The Vegan, Volume 5, Number 2, pages 13 to 15. Clearing the ground. The present stage in the development of the vegan society is characterised by a centering of attention upon the implications of the question, what is veganism? There is more, much more behind this disarmingly simple query than it first appears. To begin with, we have to clear our minds of certain assumptions, to realise, for example, that when we say veganism is this or that, what we are actually saying is, my idea of veganism is this or that, for there is nothing in the constitution of the vegan society which states what veganism is. The fact that the society has reached its present position without having defined in any precise way the light it attempts to reflect need not disturb us. There were good, if perhaps unrecognised, reasons why definition should not be attempted until the society reached a certain point along its road. What, however, must give us food for thought is the growing feeling that such a point is now not far off, that the limited period during which lack of definition is useful and desirable is approaching exhaustion. The way in which our movement may be provided with an agreed definition is, of course, by the majority consent of an annual or special general meeting, and by the inclusion of that consent in the form of a short definition, either as one of the society's rules or as a preamble to the rules, or by some other constitutional device. Although this procedure appears to be a simple one, the task of finding and recognising the right definition is more complicated than might at first be thought, for the society has evolved a long way in a short time, and if we are to provide ourselves with an adequate picture of what is involved, we must glance at least briefly at the ground we have already covered. In July 1943, there appeared in the Vegetarian Messenger a letter about the use of dairy produce by vegetarians. Correspondence on the subject was maintained for something over 12 months, after which there appeared in the same journal a request signed by Donald Watson of Leicester, asking vegetarians interested in living without dairy produce to write to him, and he received about 50 replies. In subsequent negotiations, the Vegetarian Society declined to agree to the formation of a non-dairy group within its ranks, and itself suggested a group might be formed outside the Vegetarian Society. This small group of persons brought together by Mr. Watson thus become the embryonic organisation eventually known as the Vegan Society. In November 1944 there appeared the first issue of the Vegan News. The organisation had a few dozen members, and the word vegan had just been adopted by Mr. Watson as one suggestion for the name of the new group. As a matter of passing interest, other suggestions included dairy ban, alg vegan, Vitan, benevore, bellevore, and some complicated titles like total vegetarian group. We should indeed feel relieved at the final choice. The editorial of the first Vegan News stated, "We can see quite plainly that our present civilization is built upon the exploitation of animals, just as past civilizations were built upon the exploitation of slaves." This was an early hint that non-dairy vegetarianism was destined to be more than one part of the general philosophy of the new movement. The third issue, May 1945, stated that veganism was the practice of living upon fruits, nuts, vegetables, grain, and other wholesome non-animal foods. It would perhaps have been more accurate to have said not that veganism is, but that it involves living upon such foods. The fourth issue, August 1945, stated, "The object of the Vegan Society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life, whether it is profitable to do so or not." This is a considerable widening of the original non-dairy motivation. The Vegan Society was formed in the constitutional sense on March 15, 1947, when a special general meeting adopted for the first time a set of rules. There was, however, still no attempt to find an agreed definition of veganism. Rule 2, which laid down 3 of the many possible aims of the society, was, and is, quite silent about many other aims which might equally be regarded as being vegan. The stated aims refer only to diet, commodities, and the spreading of vegan teaching. They do not mention other aims which might equally be regarded as being vegan. Such aims, for example, as the opposition to hunting, vivisection, performing animals, and the castration and enslavement of animals for transport and other work. Above all, they are not, nor do they pretend to be, a definition of veganism. The Vegan Society is therefore to the present day a group of persons who have come together in a response to an intuitive stimulus which has not yet crystallised into words. Although the immediate cause of the emergence of veganism was the compelling desire of a few persons to make their vegetarianism logical, non-dairy vegetarianism was in fact no more than the trigger that released veganism into the world of everyday affairs. The omission of a binding definition of veganism at that date was a historical necessity if it was to have the time it needed to emerge in completeness and strength. It is, however, when we turn away from the past, but without forgetting it, that we are compelled to consider whether the critical point in time which the entity veganism may be said to have emerged fully is not close upon us. If it is, then the conclusion that a definition is now necessary is inescapable, for the society will be approaching one of those crossroads which every evolutionary organisation finds itself approaching from time to time. Of the roads ahead, one will be the road of an indefinite veganism, depending for its meaning upon a host of individual interpretations, unchecked and uncheckable by any agreed standard definition. The other the road of a definite, clear and precise veganism, which shall have the consent and allegiance of every person who joins the society. The looseness of the organisation, which has so far characterised the vegan movement, has no doubt been the right type of organisation for the early stages of a movement which seeks to express so new and so vital an idea, which does undoubtedly lie behind the name vegan. But if I am right in my view, the significance of the present position is that looseness of organisation and absence of definition are approaching the point at which they not only cease to be useful and even essential, but are in danger of becoming agencies of reaction. If it is true that it is necessarily in the early stages for the different aspects of veganism to be held, as it were, in solution, it is equally true that if the process is to continue upon its natural course, crystallisation must follow within a reasonable time. Above all else, this means the emergence of an accepted definition of that which gives us being as a society, a definition which shall be constitutional and therefore binding all who join our movement. The nature of the development of the vegan society suggests that the form in which definition should be accomplished is the form of a principle from which certain practices logically devolve, and not in the form of a set of practices or aims. At its highest level, veganism cannot be both practice and principle, and to make it a set of practices will involve unending argument as to what type of practices shall be included and what omitted, and what will at the same time fail to provide any agreed standard of reference by which their eligibility can be checked. The search for such a principle is not an inventive task, but a voyage of discovery. The principle exists, it is our job to find it, perhaps the most important job we have on hand. If my belief is justified, it is a principle which will one day impact upon the world in much the same way as did the movement to abolish human slavery. I hope in a subsequent article to suggest how it may be discovered, and what is perhaps more important, to suggest how it may be recognised as representing the destiny of the vegan movement. But whatever our individual views, we must give thought to this task, for we must be certain that what we finally decide is the best of which we are jointly capable. In Search of Veganism 2 by Leslie J. Cross, from the fall 1949 issue of The Vegan, Volume 5, Number 3, pages 15 to 17. Let my creatures go. The present stage in the development of the vegan society is characterised by a centering of attention upon the implications of the question, what is veganism? This is an attempt to discover the principle whose label is veganism, and to suggest a tentative form of words which as a short definition closely describes it. It should be held in mind that the views expressed are the writers, and in no way commit the society or any other member. The letter in the Vegetarian Messenger of July 1943, which stated the correspondence culminating in the founding of the Vegan Society in November 1944, was concerned with the moral and compassionate case against the use of dairy produce by vegetarians. Of the first 25 members of the Vegan Society, it was written, "So far as we are aware, every member of our group has discarded the use of dairy produce for humanitarian reasons. We will not accept that adequate nutrition need violate conscience." Vegan thought developed rapidly. Commodities manufactured from animals joined food from animals as being non-vegan. There was an early tendency to get at the roots of the relationship between man and the animals, to deal with the cause rather than its almost uncountable symptoms. There is no evidence that veganism was fundamentally concerned with anything other than man plus animal relationship. In the earlier article, quotations from the first numbers of the Vegan News indicated that the nature of this relationship was veganism's paramount concern. Other literature reinforces this view. An address on veganism, Donald Watson, 1947, contains phrases such as the following: the right approach to the problem of animal emancipation. To be true emancipators of animals, the vegan renounces the superstition that continued human existence depends on the exploitation of these creatures, and that the time has come for us to boldly renounce the idea that we may have the right to exploit animals. Similar ideas are embodied in the Manifesto on Veganism and other writings. The thread that runs through the literature on this point is a conviction that for the sake of both man and his fellow creatures, the animals must one day be freed from his exploitations. If vegan thought was one and true, veganism is therefore a movement of reform. If this is accepted, it is but one step to simple logic to assert that the vegan society is at the earliest possible moment in duty bound to define veganism, and so state the overall reform it wishes to see achieved. It is equally in duty bound to confine its basic energies to pursuing that reform. The position in which the society finds itself without any constitutionally agreed overall purpose binding upon its members is accounted for solely by the nature of its development to date. In this sense, the society is still in a state of prenatal growth, but this is not satisfactory as a permanency, for undefined reform is a contradiction in terms. It is possible to subtract from the foregoing a number of observations which lead to a definition. 1. Veganism is a reform. 2. The impelling element is compassion for animals arising out of the treatment meted into them by man. 3. Its fundamental concern is with the meeting point between the world of man and the world of animals. 4. Its existence presupposes maladjustment at that point. 5. Its purpose must be the correction of that maladjustment. 6. The maladjustment is intimately connected with man's use of animals, more precisely with his habit of acting as a parasite upon living creatures who cannot successfully resist his will. Any definition of veganism must contain these 6 observations and violate none of them. A form of words which meets these requirements is that veganism is the principle of abolition of the exploitation of animals by man. The positive aspect of this negative, non-exploitation approach is the granting of freedom. In one word, emancipation. Veganism may therefore be defined as the principle of emancipation of the animals from the exploitation of man. But although such a definition satisfies the observations set out above, it is essential to discover whether it meets the requirements of wisdom as well as logic. It must therefore be measured against the general philosophical argument. The broad demand which wisdom makes upon a man is that he shall free himself from the chains which bind him to his less noble desires and inhibit his ascent to the higher standpoints, wider vision and consequent happiness. There are a number of tests by which his efforts to free himself may be judged, and one of the most stringent is his conduct towards others whom he has power. It is applied in an acute form at the point where his world meets the world of animals, for over them he has dominion. His conduct at the point reveals tendencies which are strongly self-indulgent and at the expense of the creatures. There is widespread failure to understand that animals have rights relatively equal to his. His exploitations result in the needless curtailment of natural freedom over a wide front and inevitably end in one sort of slaughterhouse or another. This is true of all his exploitations, from the backyard hen to the great beef and dairy herds. Although some horses end their days in homes of rest, this could apply to a few only. Most are killed for commodities, feeding stuffs or human consumption. Again, worn-out cows from the dairy herds are not pensioned off into clover fields. The full indictment against exploitation, the traffic in flesh, hunting, trapping, vivisection and so on need not to be stated here. What must be faced, however, is the undoubted fact that apart from granting to animals the right and the facilities to go back to nature, no solvent exists for the conditions which the indictment reveals. Because emancipation would at one and the same moment release the animals from bondage and man from being their parasite, because by putting it into effect man would free himself some of the chains which bind him to his less noble desires, it fulfills the demands of wisdom as well as logic. There are also at least 3 further striking indications that this is so. The first 2 emerge from a broad view of the general trend of human evolution. A movement to emancipate animals may be seen to be following naturally and historically upon the movement to emancipate human slaves. It thus possesses the aesthetic and significant attribute of evolutionary continuity. Second, it is far from being outside the bounds of probability that the wrong turning taken by man somewhere in his evolution was the enslavement, domestication of animals, a proposition abundantly argued by American writer Henry Bailey Stevens. Thirdly, emancipation goes straight to the cancer at the heart of the existing man-animal relationship and would remove it at one stroke in the single cause from which all the sorry symptoms arise. A point which should perhaps be made clear at once is the emancipation of animals does not mean their extinction. On the contrary, it means a return to their own freely discovered place within nature, a return to balance, sanity and naturalness. For some animals this may well be companionship with man, for man is part of nature. For some it may be a return to wilder life. For many it would mean a gradual end to the abnormal shapes, functions and diseases which domestication has artificially manufactured out of the original wild types. For all it would mean an end of excessive and unnatural breeding. The ancient bondage at the hand of man would at last be over. It remains to be said that if as a society we become satisfied that emancipation is our purpose, and if, as we must, we then insert that discovery into our written constitution, it will not mean that we cannot continue to take a lively interest in such things as scientific or symbiotic trends in diet, in compost gardening and soil management and many other related matters, but it will mean that, like Kipling's ship, we shall have found ourselves. We shall have discovered our destiny. The crystallization spoken of in the earlier article will have taken place, and the thrust of our efforts will be guided and concentrated into a purposeful drive towards the shining, if still distant star on a major world reform.